Welcome to Republican Roundtable. I'm Max Reimer. As we continue our series on interviewing some of our Republican candidates, it's easy to talk to those who are running for legislative office or in some cases the gubernatorial office because we know what they do. Today, however, we have a guest who is near and dear to my heart, former state legislator, former lieutenant governor, lieutenant governor candidate, and former boss of mine,
Yes.
Pam Myhra, who is running for state auditor.
Yes.
Pam, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for joining us on the
Thank you.
Republican Roundtable.
Thank you.
State auditor. What does the state auditor do?
The state auditor is responsible for accountability and transparency in how government funds are used and oversees financial audits and performance reviews.
Okay.
Very simple.
And given your background, you have a background that's very catered to a
Yes,
position
it
like
is.
this. For our viewers at home, explain a little bit about who you were prior to running for this office.
All right. Well, I do have the credentials. I'm a certified public accountant with an active license. I'm a former audit manager at an international public accounting firm, KPMG, and I'm also a former legislator, as you alluded to. I served in the Minnesota legislature from the beginning of 2011 to the beginning of 2015.
Okay. What led you to get into this race specifically?
Specifically, actually, I was asked probably 100 times to run for this race, but I would always just automatically say no, and it was a very personal reason. Back in 2009, I talked to my dad and I said, "Dad, I'm thinking about getting into politics. What do you think?" And he said, "Well, if you run for politics, run for an office where you can really make a difference. Run for an office where you really care about the issues." And then he paused and said, "Don't run for state auditor." Yeah, no, he actually said that.
Wow.
You know, so for a number of years, I just would write it off. And actually, I did run for the House,
Yep.
and I won twice.
Yep.
And so this last fall, I was asked again and again and again. And then the last time I was asked, I thought, I'm going to look at this and give it a second thought. And so I talked to my husband, but the most important thing that I did is I actually went back to the law. There's about 25 pages of statute on what the state auditor does. And I looked at that, and I found myself reading it not as a potential candidate, not as a former audit manager of an international public accounting firm,
Yep.
but as a taxpayer. And I started shaking because I became angry
Wow.
at the need for it to be updated to really protect taxpayers. And there are what's called government auditing standards, and those need to be changed. There's some conflicts in there. And so after giving it some prayerful thought and getting it, I decided to run for this. And one of the things I thought to myself is well, there's issues here, but who better?
Right.
Who better to run than somebody who is a certified public accountant, who does have experience as an auditor? And I realized that I could be a catalyst to cause change, to improve the financial situation here for taxpayers.
Talking about campaigning for
Yeah.
state auditor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, like I alluded to in my introduction, it's one thing to say, I'm going to go to the legislature and I'm going to get this bill passed, or I'm going to be governor and I'm going to use the bully pulpit to get this accomplished. As state auditor, the role in and of itself is more analytical. It's looking at inefficiencies within government. How do you campaign for auditor? How do you set yourself apart in this arena of politics?
It's really easy. It really is easy because, I think actually taxpayers, Minnesotans really care about this. When I was in the legislature, I chief authored 2 bills on government transparency, and they were both passed unanimously in the House, and they were eventually signed by the governor. And I found that people across Minnesota, even nationwide, really care about government transparency and accountability. And so when I am out doing parades or wherever I am, I will tell people I'm running for auditor and I'm an auditor, and they're like, yes! I mean, that's so
That's
wonderful.
kind of important,
Yeah,
I would
you know.
think.
And I was in a parade this last Sunday, and I was just stunned at how many people, over and over again said, yeah, we need a certified public accountant to be in this role. We need somebody who has the background, the education. I found, and I've been finding, that voters really get it. They want accountability, and they want transparency in how government resources are used, and they get it, that it's important to have the background, to have the understanding.
You talked about in the legislature, you authoring 2 bills that had unanimous support. Pam, I'm wondering, during your time in the legislature, did you see anything, because that's a front row seat to government inefficiency at times. Did you see anything in particular that really kind of piqued either your curiosity or made you angry while you were at the legislature to say, hey, beyond just transparency in and of itself, this part of government needs to change? Did you see anything like that?
Well, there are a number of offices in state government. There is the Office of State Auditor, which is a constitutional office, and the state auditor answers to the taxpayer, okay? It's very important, and does a variety of different types of audits and reviews, okay? What you're talking about is more of what the legislative auditor does. Now, the legislative auditor is under the direction, the exact direction of the legislature, not the taxpayer. And so the roles are very different. And so what I would like to see is that the legislature would change, augment statute, that the state auditor would do what's called performance reviews. Right now, that is not in statute. What is in statute is, audits of cities and counties and oversight over the auditing firms that do those audits if the state auditor doesn't do them. But what I would like to see is the state auditor being able to have part of the function of doing performance audits. And I think there's a real appetite for that out there. When I was in the legislature in 2011, the Republicans voted for what was called a Sunset Commission. The Sunset Commission was supposed to look at different programs and look and see if they were still fulfilling their mission, and if they weren't fulfilling their mission, to give information to the legislature, so things could change.
We had talked beforehand, before the show started, about the state auditor and the legislative auditor, and that there's conversation around the state auditor just going away. You had made mention of that. You've said before that you disagree with that. You're obviously running for the state auditor position. Why is that necessary? Why not just move to the legislative auditor in and of itself?
I really like, philosophically, that the taxpayer, the people of Minnesota, the voters, are in control. And with the state auditor, it's their voice. They are the ones voting for the state auditor. When it comes to the legislative auditor is under the control of the legislature. And the legislature's composition can change, and it's not all the people who get the voice. It is whatever party is in control of the House and the Senate, okay? And so those dynamics are very different. I believe that it's really important that we keep the role of the state auditor so that it is answerable directly to the public. The whole idea of being a CPA, the P stands for public, and that is who we answer to, the public, to serve the public interest.
We had also talked beforehand about Rebecca Otto and her role and some of the actions that she's taken as state auditor, specifically about, there's a situation with the counties that she actually took to the Supreme Court where the county said, hey, we want to have the freedom and the ability to have our own auditing service or auditor come in for issues that dealt with the county. And Rebecca Otto said, well, no, you have to use me. As auditor, how would you have handled that whole situation differently?
I was not in the legislature at the time that that original legislation was passed. That was in 2015, and I my service ended at the beginning of 2015. If I had been in the legislature, I would have voted for it as well.
Okay.
I think it was good because what it did is it provided independence for those audits. Also, what that legislation was allowing is the same thing that has been allowed for cities for a long time. Cities have been able to choose if they want to go to have a public accounting firm do their audit or not. So that choice has been afforded to cities for a long time, and now it's being afforded to counties as well.
Okay.
So they can choose between having their audit done by a public accounting firm or by the state auditor. And so I am fine with it. I think it's good. What the Minnesota Supreme Court ruling stated is that it reaffirmed the role of the state auditor to have that oversight over those accounting firms that will be doing those audits of those cities and counties. And so there are what's called quality assurance reviews that are very, very important to make sure that the auditing firms that are coming into those cities and counties are doing their audits effectively and well.
You said one word, and I like to highlight this word, especially with the constitutional offices. That word being independence.
Yes,
so
independence.
You were a Republican legislator.
Right.
You are currently on the Republican Roundtable. You are the endorsed Republican candidate for state auditor. How do you guarantee independence, knowing that you come from a political and in some cases a partisan background during your legislative career?
Sure. I think each and every person has a philosophical view, right? We all do. But the question is, do we pursue that? Do we use the office as a soapbox? And I will not. You know, though I do have different political views, I have a voting record, but when I walk into that office, I am a state auditor, and it is very important to remain independent. And that is, independence is as an unconditional requirement of auditors. It is the most important that we remain independent so that we can be objective when we look at a particular audit. As state auditor, I actually will not be doing those audits. I will be leading the office and setting the tone. I will be wanting to make sure that our state auditor's office is following generally accepted government auditing standards. And so it is possible. You know, so I mean, we each have views, but we can separate ourselves and make sure that we are looking at these audits independently.
You made mention that, and you had somebody in the parade actually tell you it's nice to have an auditor who actually will be the auditor.
Yes.
Within your professional background, Pam, what I'm kind of curious about. Obviously, you don't need to be a CPA to run for the position of auditor. Right. Within that, and you don't like to be too prescriptive, but have you seen flaws in the system or in the current office of the auditor that led you to run for auditor?
Other than looking at statute and realizing that there's some deficiencies, there are some problems. One of the things that is a problem in statute is that, probably most people would not recall this, but going back to the 1990s, there was an office called the State Treasurer. Okay, and that office was removed and the responsibilities were folded into the state auditor's office. Those are actually conflicting responsibilities, and I would seek to separate those out through legislation. I've talked to some legislators and leadership and expressed my views and expressed my concerns, and they have said that, you know, that they would be willing to carry my bill and would be able to advocate for separating that out. Another thing that I have noticed in one of the things that transpired with this case that was before the Supreme Court is the legislative auditor did a review and had some concerns about how the state auditor had performed. And the state auditor had replied, and it didn't appear that the state auditor realized government auditing standards are surrounded around talking to responsible officials. And so the legislature actually responded to that and wrote a bill, and it was passed unanimously in the Senate. And it ended up getting in an omnibus bill in the House, and went to the governor, but he vetoed it. But it is important to know these standards, and the current auditor is not an auditor, and so apparently she was unaware of that. But being an auditor and being a certified public accountant with an active license and continuing my professional education, I am aware of those things. And so I will be able to set the tone at the top, which is very important.
That is very important.
Yes, yeah.
On the campaign trail, what kind of reception are you getting out there?
You know, it's been great.
Yeah.
It really has been great. I love going to parades, and I'm not one of these politicians who sits in the back of a car and waves. I am the politician that is there shaking everybody's hand, you know, having to run at times to catch up with my unit or whatever, but I am out there shaking people's hands and talking to them, and it's fun. It really is fun. Shaking hands, looking people in the eye, telling them my credentials and asking for their vote, and people have been very, very responsive and saying, you know, like this last Sunday, so many people are saying, yes, Pam, I'll vote for you. You know,
That's
and it's
awesome.
just, yeah, it's very encouraging. It's been a really positive experience out there campaigning. I've loved it, just loved it. I hope I can meet everyone, but of course that's not possible. But
It is a statewide. It
yeah,
is a statewide election.
Yes, it is.
It's just
Yeah.
the task seems incredibly daunting to
Yeah.
campaign on the statewide level. When you are going out and meeting people and talking about the role of auditor and then trying to connect the role of auditor to people's everyday lives in Minnesota, you're getting good reception, I assume, based on the fact that you are in and of yourself an auditor, a
Yeah.
CPA. How are you relating this position to people's everyday lives? I think, like I said before, it's easy to do that as a legislative candidate.
Right.
But people, I think, at least from my perspective, need to feel like they're connecting with the position and that it's important and that you're the person to vote for when it comes to the legislative auditor or the state auditor on their ballot. How do you make this make sense to people?
I have been finding that it makes a lot of sense to people already. I mean, it hasn't been a hard push. People get it. People get, I've been using hashtag auditor for auditor. People get that. But on a very personal level, in 2012 in Dixon, Illinois, there was an ineffective audit done, okay, by a local firm. And it turned out that the treasurer of that small community of 15,000 people embezzled over $53 million. That $53 million, what that was is, yeah, think about that. That was over $3,300 for every person in that community, whether they were a child, whether they were unemployed, were employed by the city or whatever. And it was because of an ineffective audit. So it just highlights to me how important it is that we have effective audits. And it's really hard to have an effective audit if you have no understanding of what an audit is or how it's conducted.
And people seem to understand, because, you know, Pam, we had Doug Wardlow on, who's running for Attorney General, and people understand the implications of voting for the gubernatorial candidate, for their legislative candidates. At times, the constitutional offices, though they are some of the most important positions, seem to be, they at least have the least awareness. We've had Republican candidates run for this position before.
Yes.
Is there anything within your campaign right now that you feel you're doing differently than other candidates have done in the past who have not been successful in this race?
Well, one of the things is that it's an open race. The incumbent who has been there for 3 terms is not running again. So that's a big advantage.
Yep.
And so we're more on a level field, competing with the Democrat and Republican candidate, highlighting my qualifications as a certified public accountant with an active license, experience as a former audit manager of an international public accounting firm, and also having the experience of serving in the legislature for 4 years. So that will really help me in interacting with the legislature and the governor and pursuing these improvements, these updates to the statute. Those are the things that we'll be highlighting. But I really, honestly, Max, I really think Minnesotans get it. They really want accountability. They want transparency in how their tax dollars are used.
Right.
You know, going back to this Dixon, Illinois issue, where this city treasurer embezzled all that money.
Just one city.
One city of
53
over $53 million. You know, nobody asked the question, why do you have 3 mansions and 400 horses? They didn't ask that question because of a problem of independence. But, you know, each year the city suffered. Roads could not be improved. People on the government workers were laid off. Government services were, you know, taken down honestly to the bone because they didn't have money. And this treasurer kept saying, well, it's budget cuts. But in actuality, she was pocketing all the money that was coming into the city. And it was just terrible. So I think Minnesotans get it, that when money is not being used right the way it's supposed to be, that it's not there for them when they want it, when they want their roads repaired, when they want those services provided by their city and their county.
Pam, how can people learn more about your campaign and get involved?
Well, I have a website, which is www.pamforauditor.com, or they can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at @PamForAuditor.
And what do you have coming up on the campaign trail? What can we look forward to in terms of events, or where are you going to be next?
Just, it's constantly filling in.
I'm sure.
I am going all over the state. Within a given week, I probably travel 1,000 to 2,000 miles, and I'm, you know, just crisscrossing the state, and so I'm loving it. I love this stuff.
Yeah,
I really do. So, which is a good thing, right?
Absolutely.
You know, and what's really great is I have a wonderful husband who loves doing it with me. So, you know, it's great to have that family.
And kids.
And kids, that's right. You know them.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Saw them at the convention.
Yeah. So,
very good.
Yeah, it's great to have that family support for this big adventure.
It is a big adventure.
Yes.
Pam, Myhra, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us. This has been the Republican Roundtable. I'm Max Reimer. Until next time.